The emergency signal hit the council chamber like a bomb, and every ambassador in the room went silent at the same time. High Arbiter Vashan of the Kilthari hegemony was in the middle of a boring trade discussion when his personal communicator screamed with a Priority 1 alert, and he felt his blood turn cold as he read the first line of the message. The Grand Armada of the Vilcari Dominion was gone. Not defeated, not damaged, not retreating, gone. 12,000 warships, the most powerful military fleet in the entire known galaxy, had vanished from every sensor grid in less than 6 standard hours. And there was nothing left but silence in the Oreth corridor where they had last been tracked. Vashan raised one trembling hand, and the council chamber fell into a hush so deep that he could hear the hum of the station's gravity generators beneath the floor. "I have received an emergency transmission," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "The Vilcari Grand Armada has been destroyed." For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved, and then the chamber exploded into chaos. 43 species had representatives in this room, and every single one of them began shouting at the same time. The Fennic delegates were whispering frantically to each other. The Dral trade ministers were already reaching for their communicators to alert their financial networks, and the Kilthari military advisors were on their feet, demanding answers that nobody had. Ambassador Drenix of the Vilcari Dominion stood slowly from his seat, and Voshan had never seen a Vilcari look afraid before. But Drenix was shaking from head to toe. His gray skin had gone pale as ash, and his 4 eyes were wide with something that looked very much like terror. "It is true," Drenix said, and his voice was barely a whisper that the chamber microphones amplified for everyone to hear. 12,000 ships, over 8 million soldiers, the pride of the Dominion, all of it is gone, and we do not know how. The shouting grew louder, and Voshan had to slam his staff against the floor 7 times before the room calmed down enough for anyone to think of the Ishari Combine, who was already standing at the data terminal with a look on her face that Voshan did not like at all. Korath was the most unshakable person he had ever met, and right now her hands were trembling. "Director Korath," Voshan said, "tell us what we know." Korath activated the central holographic display, and a map of the Oreth corridor appeared above the council floor, glowing blue and cold. 6 hours ago, the Grand Armada entered the outer boundary of a quarantine star system at the far edge of the corridor, she began. Their mission was a standard pacification operation, authorized by this council, I should remind everyone, against a pre-FTL civilization that had been flagged for observation. She tapped the display, and a small yellow star appeared at the end of the corridor. The system is called Sol, and the species living on the 3rd planet calls themselves humans. A few ambassadors laughed, and Vashan saw the Dral trade minister roll all 6 of his eyes. "Humans?" said General Torvak of the Kilthari military command, and he did not hide the disbelief in his voice. "You are telling me that a Class 2 civilization, a species that still burns fossil fuels and fights wars among themselves with projectile weapons, destroyed 12,000 Vilcari warships?" "I am telling you what the data shows," Korath replied, and there was no humor in her voice at all. She pulled up the only piece of evidence they had recovered, a single corrupted black box signal from the Armada's flagship, the dreadnought called the Fist of Vilcar. The recording played across the chamber, and everyone went quiet again. It was audio only, broken and full of static, but the sounds were clear enough to understand. There were alarms screaming in the background, weapons fire, crew members shouting in Vilcari battle tongue, and then the voice of Fleet Commander Ozhan barking orders that made no tactical sense. He was telling his ships to retreat in every direction at once, as if the enemy was everywhere and nowhere. Then a sound came through the recording that made every single person in the chamber lean forward. because none of them had ever heard anything like it. It was a low hum, deep and resonant, like the sound a star might make if stars could speak, and it grew louder and louder, until it swallowed every other noise, and then there was nothing, just dead silence and the soft hiss of empty space. The recording ended, and the council chamber stayed quiet for a long time. "What was that sound?" Vashon asked. "We do not know," Korath admitted, and that simple sentence was more frightening than anything else she could have said. Ambassador Drenix slammed his fist on his desk, and the crack echoed through the room. "This is an act of war against the Dominion," he shouted. "I demand a response. I demand a coalition. I demand—" "You demand nothing," Vashon said coldly, cutting him off. "Your fleet entered that system to conquer a species that had done nothing to threaten you, and now that fleet is gone. Before we speak of war, we will speak of facts." He turned back to Korath. "What else do we have?" Korath hesitated, and that hesitation scared Vashon more than the recording had, because Korath never hesitated about anything. "There is one more thing," she said quietly, and she tapped the display again. A single image appeared above the council floor, the last telemetry capture from the Fist of Vilkar's external cameras before the ship died. It showed the void of space around Earth's orbit, and floating in that void were the broken remains of 12,000 warships. Shattered hulls and twisted metal stretched across thousands of kilometers, glowing faintly with the heat of their own destruction. But in the center of the wreckage, untouched and undamaged, sat a single structure. It was small by galactic standards, angular and blocky, built with a kind of brutal simplicity that made it look crude, almost primitive, like something a child might build from metal scraps. And it was broadcasting. Korath enhanced the signal, and the translation system struggled with it for several seconds, before finally converting the message into Galactic Common. The words appeared on the display in bright white text, and every ambassador in the chamber read them at the same time. "Trespassers will be shot. Survivors will be shot again." Nobody laughed this time. The silence that followed was the heaviest silence Vashon had ever felt in 40 years of leading this council. And he could see the same thought forming behind every pair of eyes in the room. If the humans could do this to the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, what else could they do? And what would happen if the council made them angry? Vashon stood and gripped his staff until his knuckles turned white. "I am ordering an immediate investigation," he announced, and his voice was steady even though his hearts were pounding. "We will send a covert reconnaissance team to the Sol system. They will observe, they will gather data, and they will not, under any circumstances, make contact or provoke the inhabitants." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every ambassador one by one. "Until we understand what happened in that system, no one makes a move, no one sends a ship, and no one does anything foolish." The council agreed, because for the first time in living memory, all 43 species in the room were feeling exactly the same thing: fear. And somewhere far away, on the edge of the Orith corridor, orbiting a small blue planet that nobody had ever taken seriously, that little angular station kept spinning in the dark, surrounded by the wreckage of an empire's pride, broadcasting its simple message over and over into the void, like a heartbeat that would never stop. The Ishari reconnaissance vessel Quiet Fang slipped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and Field Commander Sael immediately felt that something was wrong. She had been on hundreds of covert missions across the galaxy, and she had learned to trust her instincts the way a sailor trusts the wind. Right now her instincts were screaming at her to turn around and leave, but she had orders from the Galactic Council, and she was not the kind of soldier who ran from shadows. "Activate full stealth protocols," she ordered, and her crew of 12 moved with quiet efficiency through the narrow corridors of the ship. "I want every sensor at maximum range, and every shield at full power. We are ghosts in this system, and nothing sees us. The Quiet Fang was the best spy ship the HFY Combine had ever built. Fast, silent, and wrapped in a cloaking field so advanced that it could hide from anything in the known galaxy. The cloaking field failed exactly 14 minutes after they entered the Sol system. It did not shut down dramatically or explode. It simply flickered, like a candle in a gentle breeze. And then it came back, and then it flickered again. "Commander," said Technician Rail from the sensor station, and his voice was very carefully controlled. "Something is interfering with our stealth systems." Sael walked over and looked at his readings, and what she saw made her jaw tighten. Their cloaking field was still working, technically, but it was being poked and prodded by some kind of external signal. Nothing aggressive, nothing that felt like an attack. Almost like something was studying the cloak from the outside, testing its edges, figuring out how it worked. "Can you identify the source?" she asked. "It is coming from everywhere," Rael said, and he sounded like he wanted very much to be somewhere else. "The entire system is saturated with it." Sael ordered the ship forward anyway, because that was what the Council had sent her to do: observe the humans and report back. Earth appeared on their long-range displays as a small blue marble hanging in the dark, and at first glance it looked exactly like the Council's old survey reports had described. A young world full of oceans and green land, with cities glowing on the night side like clusters of tiny stars, and thin clouds of pollution drifting in the upper atmosphere. It looked primitive, and it looked harmless, and Sael did not believe that for 1 second. "Begin deep scan of the orbital space," she ordered. "Show me everything around that planet." The results came back, and the bridge went completely silent. Science Officer Vayan was the first to speak, and her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Commander, the last Council survey of this system was conducted 40 standard years ago, and at that time the humans had a few basic satellites in low orbit and nothing else." She paused, and Sael could see her hands shaking on the console. "That is no longer the case." The display filled with data, and Sael felt her stomach drop as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. There were structures everywhere, in orbit around Earth, scattered through the asteroid belt, between the 4th and 5th planets, hidden in the rings of the gas giant, and buried in the surfaces of at least 3 moons. They were not elegant or beautiful the way galactic technology usually was. They were blocky, angular, and brutal, covered in thick armor plating and bristling with devices that the sensors could not identify. And they were enormous. Some of them were larger than HFY battle stations that had taken decades to build. "How is this possible?" Sael breathed. 40 years ago they were launching chemical rockets. Vayan shook her head slowly. "I do not understand it either, Commander, but I can tell you something even more concerning. These structures are emitting energy signatures that our databases cannot match. They are not using any technology that I recognize." "You mean they have developed something beyond galactic standard?" Sael asked. "No," Vayan said, and her voice was thin and scared. "I mean they are operating on scientific principles that the HFY Combine does not even have theories for. They have not just caught up to us, Commander. They have gone past us, far past us, into territory we cannot even see." Sael stood very still for a long moment, and then she asked the question that mattered most. "Can you determine what happened to the Vilcari Armada?" Vayan worked her console for several minutes, cross-referencing the positions of the human structures with the debris field they could still detect in the outer orbital zone. And when she finally looked up, her face had gone gray. "The Vilcari fleet entered the system through the standard approach corridor," she said. "They would have expected no resistance from a Class II species. Instead, they flew directly into a kill box." She brought up a tactical projection on the display. "These platforms, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, activated the moment the fleet crossed the inner boundary. The weapons they used appear to be some form of directed gravity manipulation, essentially folding space itself into a cutting edge and using it to tear ships apart from the inside out. Gravity weapons, Sael repeated, and the words tasted like ash in her mouth. Not just gravity weapons, Vayan corrected. Gravity weapons so precise that they could target individual sections of a warship while leaving other sections intact. The humans did not just destroy the Armada, Commander. They dissected it. Sael was about to order an immediate withdrawal when every system on the bridge chirped at once, and a calm female voice filled the ship, speaking perfect Ishari common dialect, with only the faintest trace of an accent. Reconnaissance vessel Quiet Fang, this is Solar Perimeter Defense. We see you, and we have seen you since you entered our system, 14 minutes ago. Please do not panic. We just want to talk. Every crew member on the bridge froze, and Sael felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized two terrible things at once. First, the humans had detected the best stealth ship in the galaxy the instant it arrived. And second, they had waited 14 minutes just to let the Ishari crew get comfortable before announcing themselves. It was a power move, and it was brilliant, and it was terrifying. Commander, Rael whispered, our engines are not responding. Sael checked her own console and confirmed it. The Quiet Fang's drive systems had been gently, almost politely, shut down from the outside, and she had no idea how. A small shuttle appeared on the display, approaching from the direction of Earth. It was boxy and plain, built with that same brutal simplicity she had seen in the orbital platforms. And it docked with the Quiet Fang as smoothly as if it had practiced the maneuver 1,000 times. The airlock opened, and a single human walked onto the bridge. She was a middle-aged female with brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. Wearing a simple gray uniform with a small patch on the shoulder that showed a blue circle, Earth, Sael realized, and she moved with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power stood behind her. Field Commander Sael, the human said, and she smiled warmly. My name is Captain Lena Vasquez, Solar Perimeter Defense. I brought coffee. Do your people drink coffee? Sael stared at her and did not know what to say, because in all her years of intelligence work, nobody had ever boarded her ship and offered her a hot beverage. Vasquez set a small container on the navigation console and then leaned against the wall as if she were visiting a friend and not standing on a foreign military vessel. I know who sent you, Vasquez said casually. I know why you are here, and I know what your council wants to find out. Let me save you some time. She crossed her arms, and her smile faded into something quieter and more serious. 30 years ago, we found your surveillance satellites, the ones your council placed in our outer system to watch us. We did not destroy them, and we did not announce that we had found them. Because everything we learned from intercepting your galactic communications told us one very important thing. She paused and looked directly into Sael's eyes. First contact was not going to be friendly. Sael found her voice at last. Did your species destroy the Vilcari Armada? Vasquez tilted her head slightly, and her expression was calm and impossible to read. They fired first, she said simply. Before Sael could ask anything else, Vasquez reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small data chip, which she placed gently on the console next to the coffee. This contains a message for your Galactic Council, she said. I would recommend delivering it quickly. Then she turned, walked back through the airlock, and was gone, and the Quiet Fang's engines hummed back to life as if nothing had ever been wrong. Sael stood there for a long time, holding the data chip in her hand, and then she told Rael to set a course for Thesson Prime at maximum speed. It was only during the journey home that Ven analyzed the data chip, and what she found made her call Sael to the lab at 3 in the morning with a look of pure shock on her face. The chip did not just contain a message for the Council. It contained the complete technical schematics of the Ashari cloaking technology. The same technology that was supposed to be the most closely guarded secret in the Combine. Annotated line by line with notes in human script that pointed out flaws in the design and suggested improvements. The humans had not just detected their cloak, they had taken it apart, understood it better than the people who built it, and handed it back with corrections. It was a gift, and it was a warning, and it was the most terrifying thing Sael had ever held in her hand. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was held behind sealed doors, with armed guards posted at every entrance and every communication channel in the chamber locked down to prevent leaks. And still, Vashan knew that word would get out eventually, because secrets never lasted long on Fessin Prime. Only the senior ambassadors of the 5 major galactic powers were present. High Arbiter Vashan of the Keelthari Hegemony, Intelligence Director Korath of the Ashari Combine, Ambassador Drenix of the Vilkari Dominion, Scholar Ambassador Mishi of the Fennec Republic, and Trade Minister Gol of the Drawl Communion, along with Field Commander Sael, who stood at the center of the chamber, looking like she had not slept in days. "Tell them everything," Vashan said, and Sael did. She described the Sol system in detail, the interference that hit their ship the moment they entered, the massive structures hidden throughout the system that had not existed 40 years ago. The energy signatures that operated on scientific principles nobody in the galaxy understood, and the gravity weapons that had turned 12,000 Vilkari warships into floating scrap metal. She described Captain Lena Vasquez boarding her ship alone and unarmed, offering coffee and answers with the calm confidence of someone who held every card in the deck. She described how the humans had shut down her engines from the outside without any visible effort, how they had known her ship's name and her own name, and exactly why the Council had sent her. And then she described the data chip. "The chip contains 2 things," Sael said. "The first is a recorded message from Captain Vasquez addressed to this Council. The second is the complete technical blueprint of the Ashari Combine's cloaking technology, our most classified military secret, annotated by human engineers with corrections and suggested improvements." The silence in the room was so heavy that Vashan could feel it pressing against his chest. Ambassador Drenix was the first to speak, and his voice was raw with anger. "They are taunting us," he snarled. "They destroy our fleet, and then they mock our allies by showing them how primitive their own technology is. This is the behavior of predators. Or it is the behavior of a species that wants us to understand exactly what we are dealing with." Scholar Ambassador Mishi said quietly from her seat, and Drenix turned on her with fury in his 4 eyes. "Play the message," Vashan ordered, because he did not want this session to dissolve into arguments before they had even seen what the humans had to say. Sael activated the data chip, and a holographic image appeared above the council floor. Captain Lena Vasquez, standing in a simple room with a blue and green flag hanging on the wall behind her. She looked directly into the recording device and began to speak, and her voice was steady and measured, and carried an edge of steel beneath the politeness. "Members of the Galactic Council," she said, "my name is Captain Lena Vasquez, and I speak on behalf of the United Earth Defense Coalition and the 8 billion people of our world." She paused briefly. 30 years ago, we discovered the surveillance network your council placed in our star system. We chose not to reveal this, and instead we spent 3 decades listening to your communications, studying your technology, and learning everything we could about the galactic community. Her expression hardened slightly. What we learned was not encouraging. We learned that your council operates a policy called Quarantine and Observe, under which young civilizations are monitored and evaluated. And we learned that this policy frequently ends in one of 2 ways: forced integration under terms that benefit the established powers, or military pacification for species deemed too dangerous or too difficult to control. She let that sink in for a moment, We also intercepted and decrypted the orders given to the Vilcari Grand Armada, orders authorized by this council, directing them to enter our system, and I quote, neutralize the indigenous population's capacity for independent development. In simpler words, you sent 12,000 warships to take away our freedom before we even knew we had neighbors. Drenix shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Vashon noticed that he did not deny it. The Vilcari fleet entered our system and opened fire on our outer defense stations without warning or communication, Vasquez continued. We responded, and the result is something your council is now aware of. She took a slow breath. I want to be clear about something. We did not seek this fight, and we take no pleasure in the lives that were lost. But we will not apologize for defending our home, and we will not pretend that we were wrong to do so. Then her tone shifted, and the steel softened just enough to let something warmer through. Humanity does not want war with the Galactic Council. We have spent most of our history fighting each other, and we are tired of war in ways that I suspect most of your species cannot fully understand. What we want is simple. We want to be recognized as a sovereign civilization with the same rights as any other member of your community. She straightened her shoulders. We are formally requesting a seat on the Galactic Council, not as a favor, not as a privilege, but as an acknowledgement of what should have been obvious from the beginning. We are here, we are capable, and we have earned the right to speak for ourselves. Her eyes seemed to look directly at each ambassador in turn, even though Vashon knew it was only a recording. We would prefer to be your friends. We would make very good friends. But we want to be clear. You do not want us as enemies. The recording ended, and the holographic image faded, and the chamber was quiet for a very long time. Then everyone started talking at once. General Torvak of the Kieltari Military Command was on his feet immediately, his massive frame casting a shadow across the council floor. This is exactly what I warned about, he said, and his deep voice cut through the noise like a blade. An uncontrolled species with weapons we do not understand, making demands of this council. They are a threat to every civilization in this galaxy, and they must be contained before they grow any stronger. Contained? Mishi repeated, and there was disbelief in her voice. They just destroyed the largest fleet in galactic history in 6 hours. How exactly do you propose to contain them? With a coalition, Torvak said firmly. Every major power contributes ships. We assemble a force large enough to overwhelm their defenses, and we neutralize the threat while we still can. You are talking about attacking a species that showed restraint, Mishi argued, her small frame tense with frustration. They defended themselves. They did not pursue the survivors, and they sent us a message asking for peace. Does that sound like a species that wants to destroy us? Trade Minister Gall of the Drawl Communion raised one of his 6 hands and waited for attention. If I may offer a different perspective, he said in his smooth merchant's voice, the humans possess technology that is apparently beyond anything in the known galaxy. Rather than trying to destroy them, which seems both dangerous and foolish, perhaps we should consider the economic possibilities of an alliance. You would sell us all for a profit, Drenix spat at him. And you would burn the galaxy down for your pride, Goal replied calmly. The argument went back and forth for hours, voices rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks, and Vashan sat at the center of it all, feeling the weight of every word pressing down on his old shoulders. Then Drenix played his final card, and everything changed. The Dominion has a second fleet, he announced, and the chamber went quiet so fast it was as if someone had pulled the sound out of the air. Smaller than the Armada, yes, but equipped with something the humans have not seen, the God Hand, a dreadnought carrying a planet-cracking weapon capable of rendering their world uninhabitable. He looked around the room with desperate, burning eyes. fight their fleet. We do not need to match their weapons. We just need to get one ship close enough to their planet, and the threat ends forever. Voshan felt sick. You are proposing the destruction of an entire world, he said. I am proposing the survival of this council, Trenix replied. The vote was called, and Voshan watched it happen with a growing sense of dread that sat in his chest like a cold stone. Torvak voted yes. Drenix voted yes. Gaul abstained because he never voted against profit or power. And Mishi voted no, with tears of frustration in her ancient eyes. The motion passed, and a coalition strike force was authorized to assemble at the mouth of the Oreth corridor within 30 standard days. When the session ended, and the ambassadors filed out, Mishi stayed behind for a moment, standing alone in the empty chamber, with the lights dimming around her. She thought about the message, about the woman who had delivered it, about the quiet strength in her voice, and the 8 billion people standing behind her. And she made a decision that she knew could be called treason. She opened a secure channel to the Drawl trade networks, the most widely monitored communication system in the galaxy, one that touched every corner of known space, and she leaked the vote. She leaked the battle plan, the fleet composition, the timeline, and the existence of the coalition strike force. Planet Cracker. She did not know if the humans were still listening to galactic communications the way they had been for 30 years. She hoped with every fiber of her being that they were. The coalition fleet assembled at the mouth of the Oreth corridor, like a fist closing in the dark, and General Torvak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Resolve, and looked out at 6,000 warships from 4 different species, and told himself that this would be enough. It had to be enough. The Kilthari had contributed 2,000 of their heaviest cruisers. The Vilkari had sent everything they had left, including the massive dreadnought Godshand, with its planet-cracking weapon locked and loaded in the belly of the ship. The Ashari had provided long-range support vessels against their own intelligence director's advice, and even the Drawl had sent a small contingent of armed merchant ships because Trade Minister Gull never missed an opportunity to be on the winning side of anything. Only the Thenic Republic had refused to participate. Its scholar ambassador Mishi had made her objection public, in a speech that called the operation a disgrace to the galaxy. Everything the Council claimed to stand for, Torvak did not care about speeches. He cared about results. All ships report ready, his tactical officer announced. Then we move, Torvak said, and the fleet surged forward into faster-than-light travel, and the stars stretched into bright lines around them. The journey took 12 hours, and Torvak spent most of it in his command chair, reviewing the battle plan. It was simple and overwhelming. The fleet would enter the Sol system in a wide formation. The combat ships would engage and suppress the human defense platforms, and while the battle raged, the Godshand would push through to weapons range of Earth and fire. The planet cracker would bore through the crust and destabilize the core, and within hours, the blue world would tear itself apart from the inside, and the human threat would end forever. It was brutal, and it was final, and Torvak told himself it was necessary, because the alternative was living in a galaxy where a species nobody understood held power that nobody could match. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and the problems started immediately. Every ship in the formation reported the same thing at the same time. Shields fluctuating, weapon systems showing targeting errors, navigation drifting by small but growing margins, and a strange low-frequency interference saturating every communication channel like static that almost sounded like music. The same interference the reconnaissance team reported, Torvak muttered, gripping the arms of his command chair. It is stronger than what they described, officer said with worry creeping into his voice. Much stronger. Our targeting systems are losing accuracy by 2% every minute. Push forward, Torvak ordered. We have 6,000 ships. We do not need perfect accuracy. The fleet advanced past the outer planets, and that was when the Sol system woke up. CL's report had described the human defense network, but seeing it in person was something entirely different. From the asteroid belt and the moons of the gas giants, and the empty spaces between the planets, thousands of structures began to move, unfolding and reconfiguring and powering up like a machine that had been sleeping and was now opening its eyes. The sensor readings were blinding. Energy signatures spiked so high that several monitoring stations simply overloaded and shut down, and the tactical display filled with so many contacts that the officers could not count them all. "How many platforms?" Torvak demanded. "We cannot get an accurate count," his sensor officer replied, and her voice was shaking. "Thousands at minimum. They are everywhere." A transmission cut through the interference, broadcast on every frequency in every galactic language at the same time, and the voice that spoke was male, calm, and impossibly clear considering the amount of electronic noise flooding the system. "Coalition fleet, you are entering sovereign human space. We know why you are here, and we know what the God Hand carries. You have one opportunity to withdraw. There will not be a second." The bridge of the Iron Resolve was silent, and Torvak could feel the eyes of every officer on him, waiting. For one brief, honest moment, he thought about it. And then he buried that thought under 40 years of military pride and the weight of the orders he carried. "All ships, attack formation," he commanded. "Godhand, begin charging the planet cracker. All combat units, clear a path to Earth." The fleet roared forward, and the human defense network answered. The battle lasted 11 minutes. In the first minute, the outer ring of human platforms fired, and Torvak watched 300 coalition ships come apart like they were made of paper. The weapons were gravity-based, just as the intelligence reports had described. Invisible beams that folded space around their targets, and crushed them, or cut them, or simply tore them into pieces. And there was no warning, and no flash, and no sound. Ships just stopped existing. In the second minute, Torvak realized that the humans were not firing randomly. Every shot was precise. Every target was chosen with surgical care, and the pattern became clear within seconds. They were aiming for engines and weapon systems, not crew quarters and life support sections. They were trying to disable the fleet without killing everyone aboard. This realization hit Torvak like a physical blow, because it meant the humans were fighting with one hand behind their back, pulling their punches even now, even against a force that had come to destroy their entire world. In the fifth minute, the coalition fleet had lost half its ships, and the formation had collapsed into chaos. Captains were screaming for orders on channels that were full of static and panic. Escape pods were launching in every direction, and the human platforms moved through the debris with a terrible grace that made them look less like weapons and more like predators herding prey. The Godshand was still pushing forward through the carnage, its massive hull absorbing hits that would have destroyed any normal ship. And deep in its core, the planet-cracking weapon was charging, a low vibration that Torvak could feel even from the Iron Resolve, a hum that grew louder with every passing second. "Godshand reports 70% charge," his tactical officer shouted over the noise of alarms. "Tell them to hurry," Torvak shouted back. In the 8th minute, the humans focused on the Godshand. A single gravity lance, a beam so focused and so powerful that it registered on sensors as a line of folded space thinner than a hair, reached out from the largest human platform and touched the dreadnought. It did not destroy the ship. Instead, with a precision that should have been impossible, it cut into the hull of the Godshand like a surgeon's blade, and carved the planet-cracking weapon out of the ship's body, separating the weapon from the dreadnought, the way a doctor might remove a tumor from living flesh, carefully, cleanly, and with deliberate intent to leave the patient alive. The planet cracker, a device the size of a small moon, drifted away from the Godshand in a cloud of severed cables and ruptured plating, its charging sequence dead, its power cells dark. The Godshand itself was left floating but intact, its crew alive, its weapons gone, and its pride shattered beyond anything that could ever be repaired. In the 11th minute, the Iron Resolve's shields failed, and its engines died, and Torvok sat in the sudden darkness of his bridge, surrounded by the soft red glow of emergency lighting and the distant sounds of his crew trying not to panic. A transmission came through, not on the fleet channel, but on his personal command frequency, which should have been impossible for anyone outside the Keelthari military to access. It was the voice of Captain Lena Vasquez, and she sounded tired but not angry. "General Torvak," she said, "we could have killed every soul in your fleet. We chose not to. Please make sure the Council understands what that means." The transmission ended, and Torvak sat alone in the dark. Around him, spread across millions of kilometers of space, the wreckage of 6,000 warships drifted in silence. Escape pods blinked with distress signals. Disabled hulls tumbled slowly, end over end, and scattered among the debris like shepherd dogs watching a scattered flock. The human defense platforms held their positions, with weapons powered down and sensors watching. Not a single escape pod was fired upon. Not a single life support system was targeted. Not a single disabled ship was finished off. The humans had won, completely and utterly, and they had done it while trying as hard as they could not to kill anyone they did not have to. Torvok leaned back in his chair and stared at the dark ceiling of his broken bridge, and he finally understood the thing that scared him more than any weapon or any fleet or any technology he had ever encountered. The humans had held back. Both times, against the Grand Armada and now against the Coalition, they had held back. They had fought with restraint, with precision, with a deliberate mercy that spoke of enormous power kept on a very tight leash, and the terrifying truth that settled into Torvok's bones like cold water was this: he had no idea what it would look like if the humans ever stopped holding back. He did not want to find out. Nobody would want to find out. Outside, the little blue planet hung in the dark, quiet and beautiful, and completely untouched, and the defense platforms began slowly folding themselves back into their resting positions, like soldiers sheathing their swords after a battle they had never been in danger of losing. And somewhere down on that planet, 8 billion humans went about their day, going to work, eating meals, arguing with each other, loving each other, living their small and complicated lives, most of them completely unaware that their species had just defeated the combined might of 4 galactic civilizations in the time it takes to eat lunch. The galaxy changed in the 6 months that followed the Second Battle of Sol, and it changed in ways that nobody, not the oldest ambassador, not the wisest scholar, not the most cunning trade minister, had predicted. The Vilcari Dominion was the first to fall. For centuries they had ruled their corner of the galaxy through fear and the promise of overwhelming force, and when that force was proven to be meaningless, not once, but twice, every species they had conquered decided at roughly the same time that they were no longer afraid. Rebellions broke out on 14 worlds in the first week. Ambassador Drenix disappeared from Thesson Prime without a word, and was never seen again. And within 2 months, the Dominion had fractured into a dozen smaller states that were too busy fighting each other to threaten anyone else. The great empire that had terrorized the galactic rim was gone, broken not by human weapons, but by the simple revelation that the Vilcari were not as powerful as everyone had believed. The Coalition itself fell apart almost as quickly. The Ishari Combine officially withdrew from the alliance and issued a public statement saying that the operation had been a catastrophic mistake. The Draal Communion pretended they had never been involved at all, and the Keelthari hegemony was left holding the blame for a disaster that had cost thousands of ships and accomplished nothing. And then there was General Torvok. The Keelthari military command wanted to court-martial him for losing the fleet, and they put him on trial in a grand hall full of officers and politicians who wanted someone to punish for the humiliation they had suffered. Torvak stood before them in his worn uniform, with his medals removed and his rank stripped. And he did not defend himself the way anyone expected. He did not blame the humans or complain about their weapons, or argue that the plan had been flawed from the start. Instead, he told the truth. "I have fought wars for 40 years, he said, and his deep voice filled the hall without any amplification. "I have faced enemies across 100 battlefields, and I have never, not once in my entire career, encountered a force that had the power to destroy me completely and chose not to." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of soldiers and leaders who had spent their lives measuring strength by the ability to kill. "The humans could have wiped out every ship in our fleet in the first 5 minutes, he continued. "Instead, they spent 11 minutes carefully disabling our vessels while avoiding our crew sections and life support systems. They carved a planet-killing weapon out of a dreadnought without destroying the ship around it. And when it was over, they did not fire on a single escape pod." His voice grew quieter, but somehow more powerful. "That is not the behavior of a monster. That is not the behavior of a predator or a conqueror. That is the behavior of a civilization that has the strength to destroy everything in its path, and the wisdom to choose not to. And that, I believe, is something this galaxy has never seen before." The hall was silent for a long time after he finished. The court-martial ended without a conviction, and Torvak walked out of that hall a changed man, who would spend the rest of his career arguing for the one thing he had spent his whole life fighting against: peace. High Arbiter Vashon, who had watched all of this unfold from his position at the head of the Galactic Council, with the weariness of someone who was too old for this much history, finally did the thing he should have done from the beginning. He sent a formal invitation to the humans, asking them to join the Galactic Council as a sovereign member civilization. The human delegation arrived at Fessin Prime 3 weeks later, aboard a single ship that was small and blocky, and looked like it had been designed by people who cared more about function than appearance, and the entire station held its breath as the airlock opened. Captain Lena Vasquez walked out first, and she was no longer wearing the gray uniform of Solar Perimeter Defense. She had been promoted. Ambassador Vasquez now, representing all of humanity in the most important moment their species had ever faced. She was accompanied by a small delegation of humans who looked around the grand corridors of Fessin Prime with wide eyes and barely contained excitement, like children visiting a place they had only read about in books. And something about that honest wonder made several of the alien ambassadors relax just a fraction. The council chamber was full for the first time in years. All 43 species had sent representatives, and they filled the curved rows of seats in a great circle around the central floor, and every eye in the room was fixed on the small group of humans who walked to the center and stood there looking somehow both out of place and exactly where they belonged. Vasquez took her position at the speaking platform and looked around the chamber, meeting eyes and lenses and sensory organs of every shape and color. And she smiled, a small, warm, genuine smile that carried no threat and no agenda. "Thank you for having us," she began, and her voice was steady and kind. "I know that many of you are afraid of us, and I want you to know that I understand why. We appeared without warning. We defeated your most powerful fleet, and we demonstrated technology that you cannot explain. From your perspective, we must look very dangerous, and I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. We are dangerous, that is the truth, and there is no point in hiding it. But danger is not the same thing as malice, and power is not the same thing as cruelty. And I think if you give us a chance, you will find that the most important thing about humanity is not what we can destroy, but what we choose to build." She reached into her jacket and produced a small data device which she placed on the platform. This contains our first offering to the Council. Not weapons, not military technology, but advances in medicine, energy production, and agricultural science that we developed during the 30 years we spent preparing for this moment. We started with the things that save lives, because we wanted you to understand who we are. She looked around the room again, and her expression shifted into something deeper and more serious. Our world nearly destroyed itself. Not once, not twice, but over and over throughout our history. We poisoned our air, we burned our forests, we built weapons that could crack our own planet, and we pointed them at each other across borders that we had drawn ourselves. We fought wars over land, over resources, over ideas, over the color of each other's skin. Several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, because this was not the kind of thing a species usually admitted in a room full of strangers. We are not here today because we are perfect, Vasquez continued. We are here because we survived our own worst impulses, and we did it not by becoming less dangerous, but by learning, painfully, slowly, and at terrible cost, that strength without compassion is just destruction waiting to happen. She placed both hands on the platform and leaned forward slightly. We spent 10,000 years learning, the hard way, that the only future worth building is one where everyone has a seat at the table. We did not come here to conquer this galaxy. We did not come here to replace one empire with another. We came here to pull up a chair and sit down with you and figure out how to make this work. Together. The chamber was silent, and in that silence something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like the first crack in ice at the end of a long winter. Scholar Ambassador Mishi of the Fennec Republic rose from her seat, and she was old and small and fragile-looking, and she brought her hands together in a slow rhythmic pattern, clapping, a gesture she had learned from intercepted human broadcasts years ago when she first became fascinated by this strange species that nobody else took seriously. The sound of her clapping echoed through the chamber, lonely at first, and then Trade Minister Gold joined in because he never missed a trend. And then a Kilthari delegate joined, and then an Ishari officer, and then more and more, until the entire chamber was filled with the sound of dozens of species, all doing something that none of them had ever done before. United in this one small borrowed human gesture. Vasquez stood at the center of it all, and her eyes were bright, and she did not try to hide the emotion on her face. 6 months later, Field Commander Sael, reassigned from intelligence work to diplomatic liaison because the Ishari Combine decided that the person who had first met the humans should be the one to work with them, visited Earth for the first time. She walked through a human city called New York, and it was everything she had expected, and nothing she was prepared for. It was loud and messy and chaotic, full of vehicles and people and animals and smells and sounds that crashed into each other in a way that should have been unpleasant, but somehow felt alive in a way that the clean, orderly corridors of Thesson Prime never had. She was studying a street vendor's cart full of strange, colorful food when she felt a tug on the edge of her coat, and she looked down to see a small human child, very young, with dark curly hair and enormous brown eyes, staring up at her with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. "Are you an alien?" the child asked. "Yes," Sael said, because she did not know what else to say. The child reached into a pocket and pulled out a bar of something wrapped in bright paper, already half-eaten and slightly melted. "Want some chocolate?" the child said. "You can have the rest." "Welcome to Earth." Sael took the chocolate, and she looked at this tiny human on this tiny planet that had somehow shaken the foundations of an entire galaxy. And she felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt hope. The galaxy had asked itself a question: who destroyed the Armada? And it had expected the answer to be something terrifying, some great weapon, or some terrible force, or some monstrous intelligence beyond comprehension. But the real answer was much simpler and much stranger. It was a species that had been forged in fire and tempered by its own cruelty, and had spent 10,000 years breaking itself and putting itself back together, over and over, until it finally learned the hardest lesson any civilization can learn. That true strength is not the ability to destroy. It is the ability to destroy and choose not to. And that, the galaxy would discover, was the most terrifying and the most beautiful thing of all.